Appreciate you taking the time and making the effort to be here this morning to share your testimony. Dr. Birnbaum will have 10 minutes to testify. You may proceed. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Linda Birnbaum, Director of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences and also Director of the National Toxicology Program. I am a Principal Investigator in the National Institute's Intramural Research Program as well. I was formerly the President of the Society of Toxicology, a member of the Academy of Toxicological Sciences, and in 2010 I was elected to the National Academy of Medicine. It is an honor to be invited to testify at today's hearing by the Consumer Product Commission Chairperson Anne Marie Burkle. I previously testified before the Commission in December of 2015 on the general topic of non-polymeric halogenated flame retardants, and I refer the Commission to my previous written testimony by way of background on the adverse effects associated with these chemicals. Today, at the request of the Chairwoman, I will refer to and expand upon some important aspects of my previous testimony and address the findings of the CPSC staff report on the topic issued on May 24, 2017. I thank the CPSC staff for their efforts to address the complex public health issues associated with mixtures of halogenated flame retardant chemicals in consumer products. However, I'm here today to respectfully disagree with the staff's draft recommendation to deny the petition, and I urge the Commission to carefully reconsider the toxicological and public health hazards associated with organohalogen flame retardants, OFRs. As I stated in my 2015 testimony, all members of the proposed class of chemicals that have been adequately studied have significant human health concerns. By studying these chemicals, we have developed a strong understanding of OFR biological activity, mechanism of action, and potential to do harm. As individual chemicals are studied and found to be hazardous, new, closely related compounds are routinely brought to market as replacement. Often, these new replacements are regrettable and just as harmful as the original, or worse. Unfortunately, scientific research cannot keep pace with the flood of new chemicals in commerce, and as mentioned in the CPSC report data, information gaps in toxicology arise. These gaps are often filled by comparing the chemical structures of replacements with more well-defined chemicals, a process known as read-across. For example, there have been serious environmental concerns associated with environmental exposures to one class of OFRs called polybrominated diphenyl ether mixtures, or PBDEs. These concerns have persisted for nearly 2 decades due to the high resistance of PBDEs to both environmental and biological degradation, ongoing human exposure, and evidence of toxicity to these compounds, as well as structural similarity of PBDEs to polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. There are over 200 compounds classified as PBDEs, and all commercial formulations involve complex mixtures of different PBDEs. Since my testimony in 2015, studies have demonstrated that these environmentally persistent compounds are bioaccumulative. They're also found at higher concentrations in fetal blood than in the mother's blood. 2 of the major commercial formulation mixtures have been shown to cause cancer in both rats and mice. These mixtures are known to be associated with persistent neurobehavioral problems in children, and in July 2017, the state of California listed pentabromal diphenyl ether mixtures, specifically DE71, as a known carcinogen. Researchers at the University of Cincinnati have shown an association between childhood behavioral changes and prenatal exposures to PBDE47. These effects appear to continue into childhood by affecting reading ability and IQ. A recent systematic review has concluded that early life exposure to PBDEs is associated with developmental neurotoxicity in humans. Other experimental studies in animals and observational studies in humans have shown that PBDEs are endocrine disruptors and are associated with metabolic alterations. Concern over persistence and toxicity led to voluntary removal of all PBDE commercial formulations from production in the U.S. and bans in Canada, Europe, and Japan. The lower molecular weight PBDEs have been listed for elimination under the Stockholm Convention of Persistent Organic Pollutants, and DECA-BDE is currently proposed for listing as well. But PBDEs are not the only OFRs that have been shown to have significant effects. As far back as the late 1970s, brominated and chlorinated tris were restricted based on cancer concerns. Productions of high volumes of hexabromocyclododecane pose a persistent environmental threat. This additive flame retardant is found in the environment, wildlife, and people. In vitro and animal studies have indicated it is an endocrine disruptor, is toxic to the liver, and causes adverse neurodevelopmental effects. It has also been nominated for elimination under the Stockholm Convention. The largest volume brominated flame retardant, tetrabromobisphenol A, has recently been shown to be carcinogenic in rats and mice. It's an endocrine disruptor and alters neurobehavior in animal studies. Concerns about the developmental effects of FM550, a new replacement BFR, have been raised in several studies. I think it's important to also address a related class of halogenated flame retardant chemicals referred to as per- and polyfluorinated alkyl substances, or PFAS. This class of chemicals includes PFOA and PFOS, but also includes hundreds, perhaps thousands, of shorter, longer, and branch chain formed of these OFR chemicals. Today I'm going to refer to them simply as PFAS. PFOA, its salts, and PFOA-related compounds were nominated for listing in the Stockholm Convention in 2015 because of their documented human health effects, including cancer, alterations in lipid metabolism, endocrine disruption, and immune suppression. The manufacturing and use of these chemicals began in the late 1940s and continues today. Like many industrial chemicals, PFAS have been used in a wide variety of consumer products in addition to their use as flame retardants and foaming agents. They occur in food containers, water-resistant clothing, furniture, carpeting, and cookware. PFAS are highly resistant to heat and do not easily degrade in oil or water. They tend to bioaccumulate in tissues, meaning that they are often found in blood and other tissues in concentrations greater than the surrounding environment. PFAS usually occur as complex mixtures and are ubiquitous in the environment. Due to their environmental persistence, bioaccumulation, and potential for long-range environmental transport, these chemicals can be found in groundwater, surface water, soils, and air in most regions where they've been manufactured, disposed of, or used. PFAS have been measured in animal and plant tissues throughout the world, including the Arctic. PFAS have been identified in nearly all human serum samples tested in the U.S. These exposures are largely due to contaminated household water and consumer products. The chemicals are present in breast milk and have been shown to readily cross the placenta into the developing fetus. Though PFAS have been commercially available for decades, recent additional concern has arisen due to their pervasive occurrence in some metropolitan drinking water supplies at concentrations above the health advisories issued for PFOA and PFAS by EPA in November of 16 of 70 ppt. In fact, many states have established individual advisory levels lower than the EPA's advisory. Contamination of drinking water sources by these chemicals has been the subject of numerous congressional hearings, is of increasing concern to state and local governments, and was described by one of my colleagues as one of the most significant emerging health threats of our time. All the chemicals that I've described today are either formulated as mixtures, contain fluorinated byproducts of synthesis, or break down into chlorinated, fluorinated, and/or brominated compounds in biological or environmental systems. Thus, in environmental exposure studies, all OFRs will be found as mixtures in various dynamic states of purity, metabolism, or degradation. It will always be difficult or impossible to determine the makeup of such changing chemical mixtures. While I commend the CPSC staff for undertaking the OFR evaluation, I believe their review is limited in the data considered, as many new studies have been recently published. Their conclusions related to data gaps will never be filled with new chemicals coming to market constantly. Further, I specifically asked the question whether the accumulated data they reviewed suggested that any members of this class were safe for use in consumer products. The draft state report states that toxicological properties of the individual OFRs are not uniform and show variation in their potential health effects and their potential toxicity under FHSA. The report goes on to state that available data indicate that one cannot consider OFRs as a class under the FHSA because one cannot conclude that every OFR would meet the toxicity prong of the FHSA's definition of hazardous substances. The FSHA seems to contradict this statement in Section 2, where it states that a hazardous substance is any substance or mixture of substances which is toxic and may cause substantial personal injury or substantial illness during as a proximate result of any customary or reasonably foreseeable handling or use. Chairwoman Burkle, Mixture of OFRs, including those mentioned during my testimony, have been shown to have adverse bioactivity and present a hazard from overt toxicity. Mixtures of OFRs are the offending substance, and the identification and assessment of individual components is neither possible nor feasible. All components we have tested are a public health concern, but we will never be able to test all of these chemicals. The CPSC conclusion that we can't adequately address complex mixtures such as dust and therefore should not act inhibits our ability to protect public health. As these compounds continue to bioaccumulate in the environment and in children's blood, I support action to minimize the ongoing public health hazard posed by OFRs. The nature of the toxicological science surrounding the OFR class of chemicals is complex, and once again, we appreciate the attention staff has paid to these issues. I personally know of no halogenated OFRs of those studies which has not been shown to cause problems. However, I believe the Commission may want to seek the advice of a formal advisory board, such as the Toxicological Advisory Board used by CPSC to consult on complex matters from 1979 to 85 and recommended in the FHSA. I thank the Commission and Chairwoman Burkle once again for the opportunity to address this important issue. I remain at your service to provide any further assistance that you might require during this decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birnbaum, and I will begin the first round of questions from the dais. I'm actually going to list my questions, and then I'll let you have the remainder of my time to answer those questions. So within the staff briefing package, they identified several issues. You've referred to them in your testimony. The first was that there are data gaps, and that we don't have enough information on individual chemicals that would allow us to ban a certain chemical classification of chemicals, a class of chemicals. So I want to understand that without that information, the petition, and you're supporting the petition, requests that we would ban this class of chemicals. My second question has to do with the links. Staff indicates in their briefing package that there's no direct link to household dust, and that there is no direct link to the products that are being asked to be banned. So if you could speak to those two issues. What's the justification if we can't draw a link to those products? And lastly, staff mentions this in their briefing package, but it's also, after being on the Commission for 4 years, kind of the information I've received is that the petition, which staff also says uses outdated data, indicates it's not an accurate reflection of the marketplace. So for instance, one of the commenters talked about mattresses and the fact that no U.S. manufacturer is using flame retardants in mattresses. So again, and you referred to this time lapse and the difficulty with the data, which I acknowledge that. Staff yesterday indicated their 10-year cycles. But how, in terms of gathering the data and having the ability to go forward with findings? But so those are my questions, but primarily it's the staff has raised these issues. I think they're valid issues, and I would appreciate if you could speak to those. Thank you.
So the issue of data gaps, there will always be data gaps when you have new chemicals continuously coming on the market. The other issue is that these chemicals, while you can test them on a one-off basis, that is not the way they are found in the environment and to which people are exposed. When studies have looked at what is in human breast milk or human blood, is you find a whole plethora of different OFRs in their bodies, and that is the reality of the exposure. That is not to one, is to a complex mixture, and in fact, you will never be able to feel the data gaps on all the individual compounds. I think the point that every chemical that has been tested in this class, when it has been looked at, has shown adverse effects. The issue about no direct link to dust, there is now data which indicates the presence of OFRs in house dust, and that dust has been linked to the levels of exposure in people. A number of studies have been published within the last 2 years that clearly show what's in house dust gets on people's hands and gets into people's bodies. And the third, that there's a time lapse for them, that some of the things in the petition related to use are not up to date. I would agree with that. Science is moving very rapidly. As the marketplace is moving rapidly, and as concerns arise from the scientific literature, the marketplace responds.
So, in fact, as we look across the spectrum of products that was requested to be banned, many of them, flame retardants, and I look to the furniture industry as well as mattresses, flame retardants are not being used in those products. Yes, there are old products out there, but in the new products, they're not being used. And so that to me is an issue that as we go forward seems like there's a self-correction going on without the banning of those products. The other thing I wanted to just talk about briefly is the dose makes the poison. So just because there is the presence of an organohalogen flame retardant in urine or in blood, that doesn't necessarily make it toxic. It depends on the level. I mean, if you drink too much water, right, which we all love water, but if you drink too much of it, it becomes toxic. But it's the dose that's so critical, not just the presence of it.
It's not only the dose, Chairman, it is also the timing. And so that there is growing data, both from animal studies, which are conducted, some of them are conducted at low doses, but in the human general population exposures, where we are seeing in now a multitude of different studies effects being associated with, for example, in utero or infantile exposure at levels that are present in the environment today.
Thank you. My time is almost about to expire, and again, thank you for your time this morning, and I now refer to Commissioner Adler.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you and your staff for being so helpful in developing the logistics of this. I know it was a challenge, and I really want to commend you for that. Dr. Birnbaum, I read through the submissions today, and I noted that one of your non-NIEHS colleagues described you as the nation's preeminent toxicologist and author of over 700 peer-reviewed scientific papers, books, chapters, and reports, and you have a string of honors and awards that I can't begin to count. In addition, I note, and I see your chief toxicologist is with you, that you preside over an institute of many, many, many eminent scientists, and you have a budget 7 times bigger than ours, I note in passing. So I guess my question is, in either your research or that of the NIEHS scientists, do you have any reason to believe that any of the OFRs that have yet to be studied will be shown to be in effect safe, not to present a significant hazard to the public?
That's a very hard question to answer.
Thank you.
Because, you know, you're going into the unknown, but based upon read-across approaches, based upon what we know about a wide variety of chemical structures of different OFRs, all of them appear to have the potential to have adverse effects.
In other words, the staff has pointed out that there are varying levels of toxicity with respect to OFRs, but I analogize that to automobiles. Whether I get hit by a sedan or by a truck, I'm going to be just as dead. And so the question is, have we run across an OFR that seems to have such a low level of inherent toxicity that you could even speculate that it might be shown not to present a serious health hazard to human beings?
In my knowledge, I know of none that don't have the potential to cause serious effects. And again, I would stress that they are never present one at a time. It is a complex mixture to which you are exposed.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing out the fact that mixtures in the real world are what we have to contend with, especially in dust. I guess here's another simple question. Do we need FR chemicals in the 4 product groups that are subject to this petition?
I think it's very important to ask the question. You know, that should always be the first question. Do we need it? The second question would be, does it work? And the answer to both questions, I would suggest, well, the answer to the first questions is in most cases, I would suggest, no, we don't need. I know they're not in mattresses anymore, but do we need them in some of the baby products? Do we need them in some of the household products? And then the question, or are there alternative products? And then the other question of does it work is another one. And at the concentrations that these flame retardants are present in consumer products, in fact, they do not provide the retardation of the flames. In other words, it doesn't slow down the burn.
Yeah, I note that there is a push, I think within NFPA, National Fire Protection Association, to actually have a upholstered furniture standard meet the business flammability standard, which saturates furniture with FR chemicals. But for consumer products, again, it's the concentration, and it's your contention that that concentration provides minimal marginal safety?
At best.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner Robinson.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Dr. Birnbaum, for both your presentation in 2015 and today, and for your very helpful involvement in this issue for the agency. I just want to say that from everything that I've read, I'm absolutely convinced that of the OFRs that have been studied, that all of them are toxic, migrate out of products, and present a risk of adverse health impact. And I think from reading the staff's package that they completely agree with that as well. But the areas of concern that they raise, as Chairman Burkle pointed out, the data gaps, and what they basically say that they're troubled about treating these as a class because they have limited data showing individual OFR compounds. The data show that they have varying toxicity and exposure potential. There's varying properties of individual OFR compounds indicate that OFRs represent several subclasses, and even then within the subclasses that there are variances, and there are a number of OFR compounds about which we have no data regarding their toxicity. And then their second area of concern is the fact that even though we know the chemicals are in household dust and the dust gets into people, that we have no direct link of these 4 product categories that the petition talks about contributing to the household dust or the degree to which they contributed. So let me just first of all follow up on something that Chairman Burkle said with respect to the household dust. And I mean, I'm having trouble thinking how there's ever going to be data that would support these 4 products and what they contribute to the household dust. But could you just comment on why you don't believe that should be a concern in terms of us regulating this class of chemicals?
So we know that these chemicals are, the cases that we are most concerned with are not the polymeric forms. That's not the issue. The issue is things that are just mixed in with the product. They're not chemically bonded to the product. So over time, they get out of the product and into the dust. It's very difficult to actually prove that pathway. But we know that they're in the product, we know that they're in the dust, and we have shown how it gets from the dust into people. So I think there have been data that have shown where measurements of some of these chemicals in the products, there's a relationship with the amount that's in the dust. Over time, more gets into the dust, and again, dust gets into people not only via their hands, but also a certain amount by inhalation.
Okay, and let me just say that anytime I refer to OFRs today, I just state this generally, I'm referring to what we're talking about in the petition, which is the non-polymeric additive organohalogens. Why, and I'm going to follow up again on another question that Chairman Burkle asked about self-correction. Why don't you think this self-correction, as she refers to it, isn't enough? Why should we ban these OFRs?
So my understanding is that even new products, some things which are not required to have OFRs, aren't showing OFRs when they're actually tested. We also import a great number of products which have OFRs in them. But I think the biggest thing would be is that some new products on the marketplace today, when they get tested, actually have OFRs in them. So over time, it may be that the marketplace does a great job of responding to consumer demand.
So the Toxicological Advisory Board that you talk about from 79 to 80 to 85, I have not had a chance to talk to Commissioner Adler about that, so maybe he knows about it, but I didn't know about that. And you didn't refer to our chat, which we had with respect to phthalates. But can you tell us if they're different, or are you sort of thinking of the same thing?
I'm going to turn it over 1 second to Chris Weiss, who's
Sure.
my chief toxicologist in my Bethesda office, who actually will be deployed as of tomorrow. So we're lucky to have him here today.
And the question again is, are phthalates included in the?
No. It's just with respect to whether there's a difference between a CHAP, as we convened for phthalates. I mean, is it the same kind of body, or the Toxicological Advisory Board like they had back in the late 70s?
I see. The board that we're referring to is a collection, I believe, of 9 toxicologists.
Okay.
That from the period of, I believe, 1979 until 85, was required by the law to participate in decisions such as this. Unfortunately, and for reasons that I don't understand, that board and that process was sunsetted in 1985. So the advantage that the commission gained from
Gotcha.
that advice stopped at 1985. I'm not sure the rationale for that. What I think we're suggesting is that the board, the commission, consider reinstating such a board with highly complex problems like this. It's multifaceted, as you well know, and as the staff report indicates. And we believe that it would be an advantage to the commission and to public health, frankly, if a similar board was reestablished.
Thank you so much. I'm out of time.
Thank you. Commissioner Kay.
Thank